pretty well attached. I feel like Steve 1989 from MRE Info trying to preserve the packaging. Having to be really careful here because it seems like the plastic has somewhat adhered to the paper, considering this hasn't been opened in 40 years. Oh, this is going to be trickier than I thought. I have to be really careful here. Okay, so my original plan was to remove this film here, but I'm going to have to be really careful because I don't want to damage the paper that's underneath. And like I said earlier, it appears to have adhered to the paper. So I'm going to have to be really careful here on this one. Smells like the 70s plastic. It's definitely got that old library smell. Trying to carefully peel this plastic off of these integrated circuits. Got some tape down here holding the circuit board. I've almost got the PCB freed up, and we can take a look at it. Probably not going to be much to it since nothing's going to be soldered to it yet. But yeah, there we go. Alright, well this has not seen the light of day in 40 years. As you can see, there's nothing on it right now. It's just a bare board. So you've got your section here for your CPU and I/O, as well as your display, your keyboard input, and a teletype interface over here, power supply, and then an area for wire wrapping or building your own circuit to tie into this. I got some address lines here that you can tap into. Very nice. Brand new. Well, 40 years old, but new to me. Alright, let me see if I can have better luck now removing this old plastic. Oh boy. This was definitely trickier than I thought it was going to be, but this plastic is just sticking to everything. It was originally vacuum formed around all these parts, so it's got a tight fit, but as a result of just how old this plastic is, everything has kind of fused, and I don't see any of the letters coming off of the keycap, so that's a good sign. I was a little concerned about that, but it's definitely sticking to this foam, really sticking to this foam. Okay, well, managed to get all of the components out in one piece without destroying the paper here. There's the resistors, capacitors, and what appears to be screws and washers, maybe for some feet for the bottom of the board. I don't know. Alright, so I've got the user's manual pulled up here, and then in here there's also instructions to actually assemble this board. So I'm going to be using this as my guide to know where to put all these parts so I don't blow anything up. So let's take a look here. Looked at all the other ICs, but I noticed underneath the paper was this, which appears to be some type of filter for the LED or LCD, well, it's not an LCD, for the display, and also some adhesive. Now, I may actually have to go get some newer adhesive because I don't know if this is going to be able to hold after 40 years if the glue is dried up, but we'll try. I'm hoping this paper will come off of this lens rather easily, but we'll see as we get later on into the process. So I'm going to grab this as instructed. This contains all of the mounting hardware. So we've got some rubber feet in there, which still appear to be pliable. They're not dried up or cracked, so that's a good sign. All right, so let's take a look at these components. Let's see what we got. Try to open this without doing any damage to the bag itself. Just cutting the tape. Oh yeah, look at that. Quite a few transistors in there. I think that's going to be for the display. Got an oscillator, of course, for the system clock. Some capacitors of different size. Yeah, there we go. All right, set that aside. And put these off to the side. So the instructions call for mounting this on these feet first. And that is what I'm going to do. I'm really surprised these are not dried up at all. Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. Let's get all this out. All right, so it looks like I have 9 feet that I can mount. So there's a couple of different places around the side of the board here. So I'm going to look on the instructions and see what it tells me. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to put 3 up top, 3 on the bottom, 1 here, and then 1 on each side. So let's get started on that. All right, well, it's not quite even, but let's see if I can straighten that up a little bit. On to the next. Now I wonder why there's just one here. Oh, I see. Okay, so this is where the keypad goes. So when you're pressing on it, it gives you a little extra support. I think these rubber feet may have shrunk just a little because I am having a hard time getting these bolts in here. Sometimes they don't line up properly, so that's kind of a pain, but you know, these are the types of things I expected when assembling a 40-year-old computer kit. Now I am being extremely careful, especially with even with parts like this, not trying not to strip these out, because although I do have replacements, I do want to use as much of the original hardware as possible. Basically build it like somebody would have when this kit was purchased in 1976 or 77. Man, these little things are a pain to... I've just started, but this is definitely my least favorite part of the build. Assembling these feet. I'm ready to do some soldering. Well, suffice it to say, forget what I said earlier about the rubber still being pliable. It is not. It is hard as a rock, and it has certainly dried up, although it has not cracked. So I guess I was a little surprised originally that, I don't know, is this rubber? I can't really, can't tell if it's rubber or not. Although the user manual does say that these are rubber feet, but it just feels like hard plastic. So I don't know if it's just because these have dried up with age or what. But let me tell you, trying to press fit these little bolts in here is not a fun process, because I suspect these have shrank over time, and it's making it a bit more difficult than it normally would. Okay, last one. Thank goodness. All right, now to see if this thing sits somewhat level. Yeah, not too bad. I think it's a little high on that side, but overall that's okay. That was a bit more challenging than I expected. But yeah, those feet are hard mostly. I think some of these are still have a little bit of their rubber grip, but most of them are just lumps of plastic. So I don't know. We'll see how these feet hold up. What I may end up doing is buying some newer replacements that actually have some rubber grip. But again, like I said earlier, I do want to try to use as much of the original hardware as possible. And so far, this is all of the hardware that comes with the kit. So let's press on, shall we? We should be able to solder some stuff now. All right, so the kit instructions call for installing some capacitors. Now, I've got a couple different sizes in here. Obviously, these are resistors, and it looks like maybe a diode right there, but maybe that could be a capacitor. Let's see. Let's get some of these parts out of here. And I'm going to start laying these out. So let's get all these components out here on the table so we can have a better idea of what we're looking at. Oh, that is cool. I love that old school Motorola logo on that transistor. That's pretty awesome. All right, so sort out the parts here, put transistors over here. Those will be installed later when we're working on the display. And hopefully all of these components work. I mean, obviously they've never been used, but I don't know if it'd be possible for these to just maybe be faulty from the manufacturer. I don't know. I guess we will find out. Okay, so the first part that is going to be soldered is capacitor C1, which is up here near the power input. So I'm got to scroll up and look and see which capacitor is C1. So it appears, looking at the instructions, that let me look here. See, resistors, tantalum capacitor, C1, 22 micro, 15 volts. So let's see what the value is here. Okay, so that's a resistor there. Never seen a axial tantalum capacitor before. That's pretty interesting. I'm also going to try to solder in all of these parts where the value of the parts are visible, just because I think that's kind of cool to look at everything on the board. Because anybody who's going to really be looking at this or using it, they're all going to be nerds anyway. So, like myself, they're going to want to see all of the components. Okay, so the next steps mentioned to assemble the components into the teletype interface area, but I'm going to hold off on that because I don't know if these require additional components or if these are part of the kit. So if I end up with excess parts after installing all these pieces into the CPU area, then I will assemble the teletype interface components here. But I don't want to do that yet because I don't want to use up parts that I'll need later on the CPU area. But the instructions don't seem to mention anything about this being extra, so we will see. All right, so the next step here is to install the system clock onto the board. Let's see, Crystal at Y1 with Lynn. Let's see here, where is Y1 on the board? Here we go. Crystal 6.144 megahertz. Crystal. All right. I'm going to turn down my soldering iron a little bit because I had it turned up for some of these fat ground and power traces here. So give it a second. Alright, so we've got our system clock that will drive all of the logic on this board. And now this is interesting, so it instructs me to take some of the scrap pins from these components and shape it over the crystal oscillator as a means to hold it down and then solder this into place. So that's I've seen that done before, but it's just funny telling you to basically pull out some of your scrap parts and install this. So let me do that. Well, I guess that's making good use of every component. All right, let's see. Solder the 4 connections. Install the 8205 address decoder at A10 and solder it. Okay, so this will be the first integrated circuit going in. So the 8025 address decoder, that is, let's take a look at our chart here. That is this guy right here. Because I've still got everything laid out according to how it was positioned on this board. Although it says 3205. Oh, 8205. So 3205 address decoder. And I don't believe there's not a socket for this one, so I'm going to have to solder it flush directly to the board. D2 3205. Yeah, those pins are bent way out, so I'm gonna have to bend them in just a little bit to straighten them. You know, I've got some sockets that would probably fit this chip, but again, you know, I want to install it just as the kit shipped. Now, one thing you want to do, of course, anytime you're messing with these old dip chips is you want to look for the notch on the diagram here. So on the silk screening, you see that little notch right there. Well, the chip will have a notch too, and that'll tell you which direction the chip will go, because otherwise there's no, you could accidentally solder this in backwards, and that would not be a fun time for you or your system board. So, okay, make sure that's flush. Yeah, all right. Let's get that soldered in. Oh yeah, beauty. All right, our first chip is in. All right, install 3 dip sockets, crimping the corner leads of each to hold it in place. Okay, so I'm guessing fit the sockets in, and I'll probably actually solder each corner to keep it in place while I go through and solder the rest of the pin. So there's only 4 sockets here, and all of these are dip 40. So they're going to be for the CPU, the I/O, ROM, and the keyboard and display controllers. So let me see what location. So A11 for the 8085. So that's going to go right here. This will be the CPU. Again, checking to make sure that the notch is put in the proper position. And I'm surprised this is a machine socket, which has the round holes for the chips, because typically you see a dual wipe socket, but yeah, that's what came with it. So let's see, A11, A14 for the ROM and I/O. So that'll be right here. That's going to be our chip that contains the monitor ROM, the software that's going to boot this machine, basically. A16 for the RAM I/O, so that's going to be right here. And again, checking to make sure that the notch is in the right place. And let's see, we got one more. Let me scroll down and take a look here. Okay, so it says, okay, so for this step, it's just to solder in 3 sockets. So I'm going to put this to the side, and actually going to do this to keep these in place while I solder them in. Boy, these big ground and power leads are just, they take a lot more heat to get the solder to stick. So what I'm doing here is just basically soldering in 1 or 2 pins on these sockets. That way I can adjust them and then tack them in place. So I want to ensure that they're flush with the board. And with just 1 or 2 pins soldered in, it's a lot easier for me to make any changes. So just taking a look here, make sure that everything looks okay. We're all flush on the board, which it looks like we are. So I think what I'm going to have to do is solder in all these address leads first, and then go back and turn up the power on the soldering iron a little bit. And solder in some of those big ground traces, because it's requiring a bit more heat to get those to get the solder to grab. And I may try adding a little flux to it. I've built maybe a dozen or more computers over the years, with buying the system board and buying the graphics card and the hard drive and the memory and all that stuff and assembling it. But this is the first time that I've ever assembled a computer that required soldering in all of the individual components. And I did wrestle with actually assembling this kit, but it's kind of like a sealed game in my opinion. What fun is it if it's just sealed in the box and you just look at it? And really, realistically, there's not a lot you can do with this, as you'll see once it's assembled. But you can interact with it a heck of a lot more than you would if it was sitting in plastic. So, it's not a kit of really any historical significance, like a Moss Kim 1 or something like that. And if that was the case, I probably would not. If I had an unassembled Moss Kim 1, I probably would not touch that, because it does have some historical significance. But these are a little bit easier to find, and maybe not in unassembled form, but this is the perfect opportunity to experience putting one of these together. For what I've seen on the specs, this machine will only have 256 bytes of RAM, which is just minuscule. I'm sure you could wiretap or wire wrap in your own memory expansion circuit over here, but I'm certainly not going to do that. I'm actually just going to play with the monitor ROM software, and that'll be it. I have read some posts where people have added more memory and then added their own basic interpreter with a teletype interface where the teletype basically spits out whatever their display would. Which is pretty interesting, but I'm definitely not going to go anywhere near that far. In fact, I'm going to keep this in its stock original kit form, unmodified. So it's just going to be a microprocessor board, and that's it. There's something almost relaxing about putting this together. I can imagine if you do it all correctly and it boots up for the first time, the sense of accomplishment will be pretty awesome. So I'm hoping I don't put anything in here backwards or blow up something. I'm gonna have to go through and triple check everything. Really, where I'm the most concerned is, and I'm gonna have to really be careful, is when I start soldering in each resistor, making sure that I install the correct values in each of the spots here, because while the instruction manual does go into pretty good detail about color codes, it's not something that I'm intimately familiar with as far as looking at a resistor and saying, oh, that's a 75 ohm half watt resistor. So I'm going to have to rely pretty heavily on the install documentation. This might be a little more difficult than your typical PC build. I do see that one of the hardened rubber feet appears to have cracked, so I'm almost certain I'm going to have to install new feet on here, which, I'm a little disappointed about, but rubber does perish over time, so I'm not really surprised that it is cracking. But really, if that's all that has to be replaced, then it's not a big deal. This solder from Radio Shack is really, really good stuff. I started out using some other solder. I don't know if you guys noticed, but when Radio Shack closed, I actually bought up quite a few rolls of this because, for one, it was cheap, but it's really good stuff. Kind of sad that Radio Shack is gone. They did have an auction with some of their equipment. Down to a complete bronze bust of Charles Tandy, which would be a little odd. It sold for $1,000, which I don't know who would want that in their house. Maybe it's going to a museum. I don't know, but it was a little weird. But they had some of their Tandy computers, of course. But it was all ran by a local auction company here in Fort Worth, Texas, and all of the items were in a Fort Worth suburb, Haltom City, and you had to go pick them up in Haltom City, which is really not too far from where I live. So I did look and was tempted to buy some stuff. I mean, what would it be like to buy a TRS-80 from Radio Shack in 2017? But a lot of it went for just silly money, in many cases more than what you'd pay on eBay. So I guess many other people had the same idea, and so I ended up not buying anything. But certainly interesting to watch. And they are all gone now, at least in my area. Okay, so we've got our sockets in. It's starting to look like a computer almost. So I'm going to scroll down. Let's see, sockets. Oh boy, now we're getting to the resistors. Just what I was talking about here. Saw a 3K ohm resistor, orange, black, red at R7. So fortunately, resistors are not polarized, so we can install these in any orientation that we'd like, but I am going to try to keep them all the same, just for the sake of consistency. So let's take a look at our resistors here. Orange, black, red. Okay, try to extract a resistor without knocking all these other resistors out of here. This tape is definitely dried out. The adhesive is not holding at all. So 3K ohm resistor, orange, black, and red. Let's get that lined up here. I guess I better hold on to these scraps because I don't know if I don't think I'll have to use them again, but we'll keep them to the side anyway. So now, where is R8 on the board? That is going to be the next one. R8. Here we go. So I'm going to go through and solder these resistors into place, and we'll speed this up into a montage because this is going to take a little while, I suspect. You know, I will say that the instructions from the user manual that I found online really make this a breeze to put together. This is very simple to put together overall. It even explains all of the color codes of the resistors, so that makes it a lot easier to identify. One thing I am having a problem with is all of the rotted glue from these pieces of paper that are holding the resistors in place. The glue is all rotted and it's just turned into this powder that's getting everywhere, all this stuff. So I've got quite a bit of cleanup to do after this. Finally, I've almost got all the resistors soldered in. There's only a couple left, but really this took the longest time, getting all of these resistors in that go into the display driver. So now it's time to install 14 of these Motorola transistors. So that's going to be fun. Each one has 3 legs. All right, I've got all but 2 of the transistors installed, which looks like these will probably go up in the teletype interface area, which I said I'm going to do last. And I've got almost all of the resistors installed, which again, those are probably going to go up here. And thank goodness too, because it's it's tedious to go in and bend every one of these, solder all the legs, and then clip all the legs off. Not only that, but I've also gone through and just to ensure that none of these legs on the bottom side of the board are touching each other, because that obviously would not be good. So looks like the next step is we're going to install the final socket, and this is for the keyboard display controller. And paying attention to the notch here on the socket just to ensure that we install it correctly. And do one last check here to make sure I'm putting it in the right socket. That is correct. I am noticing as I work around the board that a lot of these feet are cracked now, that they've had the hardware installed. So I'm definitely going to have to replace them. They're really not much use here since they're all dried out. So I'll be looking for some replacements for those. But other than that, as long as there are no failed components on the board, then, and I didn't screw up something, then everything should be fine. But I will say, the instructions are really, really good. And I know I've mentioned this before, but the instructions from Intel are awesome. And this particular kit did not have any instructions in it. So fortunately, the internet came through and I was able to find the original user manual, which the first part of is actually the assembly of this computer. And then the rest of it is how to use it and what kind of programs you can punch into it and all that kind of stuff. So since we're installing the display driver chip, then we should almost be at the point where we can start putting in the actual display, because all of the supporting hardware is there. So that'll be exciting. We can actually start putting in the display and the keyboard, because we've almost run out of components to install. Alright, it's starting to look more like a computer now, almost, maybe. Once I get some of these characters on here. Alright, install the 74LS156 scan decoder at A12. So there's no socket for this. I'm just going to have to install it directly to the board. Again, making sure that the notch is in the proper orientation. I may have to actually bend these out too. So this is a brand new, old chip. Alright, now we're starting to get into the fun stuff.
installing the actual display. This will essentially be the monitor. 6-character display. So 4 for the address, 2 for the data, and these have to be installed with the decimal points at the bottom. So just got to make sure I put these in the correct orientation. All right, hooray, we've got a screen. This will essentially be our monitor. So next should be the keys for the keyboard. Alright, so now it is finally time to install all of the integrated circuits that go in these sockets. Here is the 8085 processor, the brain of the machine and the chip that will be responsible for running Crysis. Here's the keyboard and display controller. It's very odd that these come with machine sockets. I'm not quite understanding why that is, but moving right along. Here is the 8355 ROM. This basically contains the software. Check it out, ceramic package, beautiful. Alright, so I went digging through my parts bin and I did happen to find a Molex connector that has the 5-volt and ground already pressed into the connector, so that'll make it a lot easier. And that way I can just plug in this bench power supply for that supplies the same power that a PC Molex connector would, 5 and 12 volts. Of course 12 volts is not going to be needed. And it's even got a nice power switch on here. So this will be a really good bench power supply to test this out. So let's get this connector soldered on here and then we'll cross our fingers and see if it actually works. Alright, I've got the power supply plugged in. I'm just going to do a quick check to make sure everything checks out the way that it should. Because I don't want to accidentally send 12 volts into this board. That would not be good. Alright, we're looking good. A little bit higher than 5 volts, but that's okay. Alright, so I went ahead and finished building out the teletype area here. There were a couple additional components, and I've soldered on this power connector. And it's basically a PC Molex connector. It's going to give us 5 volts and ground. And I also went through and just double checked all the resistors and all the transistors to make sure there weren't any issues there. So with any luck, we can power this on and it should work. Okay, well there's no power switch on the board, but there is a power switch on this power supply, so I'm going to flick the power switch and we'll see if there's any smoke. Oh, hey, look at there. We've definitely got something on the screen. However, it is not anything that is legible. So need to do a little more digging here and see what's going on. That's interesting. So it's resetting. Alright, so I'm going to do a little poking around and see what might be happening. Hopefully we don't have a bad chip right out of the box. I think I might actually try a different power supply. I don't know if that's the issue, but I've gone through and checked to ensure all the components are soldered in the way they should be, all the resistors are the values they need to be. And I think the CPU is working because whenever I enter in some commands here, I do see the screen changes a bit. It just doesn't give me any characters that I can understand. So what it should say when I hit reset is a dash and then 8085. So that should be the default for when you boot this machine up with the monitor ROM. But I'm not getting any of that, so I'm going to do a little more investigating here. All right, well, it's not the power supply because, as you can see, I'm able to power it up with this second power supply that I have, and still not getting anything legible on the display here, so I need to do a little bit deeper dive and see, hopefully we don't have an integrated circuit that's bad, or a transistor. Okay, so I think I've narrowed down the problem to this chip here, which is the keyboard and display chip. It's an Intel 8279. Now, I ordered a replacement one of these a couple of weeks ago, and it has arrived. So I'm going to install this and see if we can get a little bit more out of this machine. Okay, looks like it's in there. Let's see what happens. All right, so that's what we're supposed to see. So now this machine is fully working. You know, it's very interesting. I don't know if this chip was defective right out of the box, or if perhaps some type of electrostatic discharge may have damaged it, pulling it out of the packaging. I know I was very careful extracting these and kept these in the anti-static foam inserts that they were packed in for the last 40 years. And the other chips seem to be okay, so I guess it is possible that it was defective, or you know, we won't ever know. But I'm just glad that I was able to find a replacement rather easily, and it fixed the problem. Well, now that we know that it works, there's only one piece left to install, and that is this piece of red transparent plastic that goes over the display to kind of soften it up a little bit. Now, I don't know if the adhesive is going to be any good after 40 years, but let me see if I can remove this carefully for the display. Look how shiny that is. Oh yeah. Okay, so it does come with this strip here, which I assume is tape. So I'm going to pull it off and see if perhaps it's still, the adhesive is still good. So it's got a strip on the top and the bottom. Surprisingly, it still feels like the adhesive has not dried out. That's really impressive. So I'll lay that across here. Be careful not to cover up the decimals. Okay, make sure that's even. Oh, that's so cool. Man, that looks good. I love it. That is awesome. So there you have it. So, other than run Crysis, what can we really do with this machine? Well, the short answer is not a whole lot. It's really more of a collector's piece. I've been looking at the manual for a little while, and it does give some very basic commands that you can use just to try to play around and test the system. Because I can't really find much information online on these, and I can't find any programs. You know, you see demos of the Moskim one and some of these others where you actually have, I guess you could say, games, whatever you could play on a 6-digit display. Nonetheless, there's a couple of demo programs in here just in the user's manual. So let's see, I'm going to try to type one of these in and hopefully don't mess something up here. And I'm not entirely sure what it is I'm doing, to be honest. But we're going to see what happens here. If I don't fat finger or something. Okay, so according to this, that is what we're supposed to see. Okay, so let's see if the modified data is in here in memory where I just entered it in. 3E47CF. Okay, so that looks okay. And I get the dash, which I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to represent, if it's waiting on another command. And let's try. So I should get the 8085 once I execute this program. Okay. Well, there you go. I'm not really sure what that did, except maybe loop it back around to when you reset the monitor ROM. So I know this video is a bit long, and it's much longer than my previous videos. However, I could not figure a way to consolidate an entire build down anymore without removing some of the critical steps in the build process. But in any case, I hope you guys had as much fun watching as I did building this machine, which was it's a pretty rare opportunity to be able to put one of these together, but I had a blast. It'll be a cool piece of my collection, and it's one that I can say that I assembled, and I assembled it 40 years after it was produced. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.